So now we get to position these layers in 3D space. But before we position them in 3D space, basically by changing the Z position, we need to create the Z position by making these layers three-dimensional. So I'm going to click one of these layers to select it in the timeline panel, making sure that's active. And I'm going to press Command A or Control A on the PC to select all the layers. And come over here underneath the 3D cube and click once in the 3D cube, and all selected layers will become 3D layers. Now, there are a couple different ways that we could approach this. We could select, let's say, one layer at a time, and we could click and drag in the composition panel on the blue arrow and drag that left or right to move this layer in 3D space. Likewise, we could select the layer in the timeline panel, hit letter P for position, and then adjust the Z position that way. And either way, no matter which method you choose, I recommend leaving position open for the different layers so you could tell exactly what the values are, both relative and absolute, in comparison to one another. Now we could also, let's say we go to a 4 view here, down at the bottom of the composition panel, change this to 4 views. Then we could go to the top view, which is by default up here in the upper left-hand corner. And then we could select the layers one at a time and then move them here in the top layer. So really this is a top view of what our layers look like. And the Marion layer right now is in front of all the others, so it looks kind of below it here in the top view, but it's closer to the camera, which would be down here looking upwards. So essentially it just seems like we have one layer here up front and then all of the other layers on one plane back that way. So say for example I selected the background layer, I could come over here with the blue arrow and click and drag on that background layer, and I could look over here at the active camera to see what that's looking like. Now likewise, you could just drag it on the Z-axis here on one of the side views. This is the right view here. Now I realize at first that when you're used to working with all these pretty colors and things looking kind of normal, and then you go to one of these views where it's just a bunch of weird sticky lines, that it might seem a little abstract at first, but once you start playing in three-dimensional space, these views are absolutely necessary. Especially once you start bringing cameras and lights into the mix and you're moving around a 3D scene, you've got to be able to look at these top and side views to get a better idea of where everything is positioned in 3D space. For now, I'm just going to take the 4 views drop down back to 1 view, and I'm going to manually adjust these properties here. You'll notice that as we reduce or make the Z position negative, we're actually bringing things closer to the camera. So what we want to do is the things like Marion here and the pool table, we want to give those a negative value so they come closer to us. And things like the background, if I hit P for position, we want to give those positive values so those scale backwards. What you might want to do also, if you start increasing the Z position of that background and it gets really far away back there, you might also want to scale that up a little bit so it's still big, it's still covering the entire background, but it's just a little farther back. Now, of course, you want to be prudent with this, though. You don't want to move it too far back, because then the farther back you move it, the more dramatically it's going to move around once we have our 3D layers in place. So this is probably a little bit too much. I'll probably just scale this down a little bit, keeping in mind that we're going to crop off probably the edges of this as we put this into another composition. And we'll go into here, let's say the You Yell You Kick 3 guy, and then maybe give him a positive value so he goes back as well. But again, you want to balance this Z position against the background Z position. Select the layer, hit P. So we have 1467 here and 233. So I think we're good to move this guy back even a little bit more. Be careful also as you're moving layers in Z space, because if we change this view to the top view and zoom out, we have this guy here. And then if we click on the background is actually way over here beyond what we could see in the top view. And if we were to select this You Yell You Kick guy and move him back behind the background like this, then we would not be able to see it anymore. So if I take this into a 4 view situation, and we'll select the You Yell You Kick 3 guy, and then you'll notice that as let's change this view to an active view so we can see what's going on. Active camera. And then as we zoom out, let's say look at this side here, this right view. This is the You Yell You Kick 3 guy in the back. And you notice that as I'm looking in my active camera view to see what's going on, as I move this back farther, it's getting back to the background. But once I go past the background, then he's behind the background. So remember that once layers are 3D, they can cross through, or in other words, intersect other 3D layers. So if you've got a layer that's disappeared, then this is what you want to do. You want to come to one of these quote unquote boring side or top views so that you can see exactly where the layer is. Now let's go and click on the pool table, for example, and hit the letter P and adjust the pool table to come forward a little bit. As we do that, you'll notice that a lot of these balls might disappear because they were in front and now the pool table's moved in front. So you'll probably want to adjust the 3D depth of those, although we're not going to do that right now. Now, we're going to off camera, so not like right now in this training, we're going to go and offset the Z positions of all these different layers. Once we've done that, what we can do is go to the layer menu, create a new camera. I'm just going to use the default settings and click OK. And with this camera selected, we can click on the Unified Camera tool, new in After Effects CS4, and we see how far away this guy is back in the back. But as we move this around, you can really see the depth of what we got going on here. The lights are really good at giving a sense of depth to this whole project. And this is obviously way too intense for what we want to create. But you get a sense of how cool this project is once you put it in 3D. Now, one thing that you might want to consider, there are a couple issues here. All of these guys have their hands on top of a pool table, except for the guy that's way back here. But they're also standing behind the pool table. That presents a real issue. If we really wanted to take the time to fix this problem, we'd have to go back to Photoshop and then, this sounds really graphic, but we have to cut their arms off so that their arms and their bodies could exist in different 3D planes. In other words, so that their hand could be in front of the pool table and their body can be behind it. Now, we didn't take this project to that level of depth, so we'll have to be tricky about keeping these guys with the pool table so that they don't look like they're too far removed from it. So that way it still looks like their hands are in front and their bodies are behind it. Now, we could go in and animate this camera and maybe even like fly it into the scene as we zoomed in a little bit closer. Some great effects that way. But I'm going to show you another way to control 3D layers using something called a null object.